morning, everybody. Welcome to the VMware Carbon Black office hours session on vulnerability management. My name is Shanley Reardon. I'm a product marketing manager here for the security business unit at VMware, and I am joined today by Dale McKay, a senior technical marketing architect here at the SBU as well, and Jerry Gamblin from Kenna Security, where he's the director of security research. So we're going to kick it off today with a couple of polls just to see how you guys are enjoying the new offering vulnerability management. So you'll see a couple of polls pop up on your screen in just a minute here, and please share your answers with us and then we'll get going. All right, so in this session today, we're going to talk through some of the vulnerability management challenges that we were trying to solve with this release, what our solution is that we just released, walk through a quick product overview, and then Jerry's going to give us a deep dive into the Kenna risk score and how that number is come up with. And then we will have plenty of time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll get to those right at the end. So today, security teams are periodically scanning their environment for vulnerabilities and handing off a long list of vulnerabilities to address to their infrastructure teams or whoever is handling that patching. And depending on the organization, this can happen monthly or quarterly, and it can be frustrating for both security and IT teams when that time of month comes up and they have to deal with that long list. So they're lacking a lot of the context that they need to effectively prioritize those vulnerabilities, which is leaving gaps in their environment for things that aren't patched because they don't understand the true risk that's being brought into the organization by not patching or remediating, addressing that vulnerability. It's operationally inefficient and it creates friction between those teams, which nobody wants that. And there's resource consumption with these vulnerability scanner solutions. They weigh down the devices that people are working on, and they also are time consuming for the teams that are managing them because they do have to set aside that time every month or every week to run the scan, go through all of the long list of vulnerabilities, and pass that off to the correct teams to remediate. So our approach with VMware Carbon Black Cloud Vulnerability Management, it's prioritized based on CVE and exploit potential. So we're drastically reducing the number of vulnerabilities that need to be addressed by prioritizing those based on true risk. It's scanless, so we're leveraging the data in the agent that is already there through the Carbon Black Cloud. So you're doing this essentially in real time and not having to schedule those scans every month and collect that data and go through that operational headache of going through the list, prioritizing, and so on. And it's built right into the Carbon Black Cloud console. So it's already in the console that security teams are using every day. The look and feel is the same, and it's right there with the rest of your security controls that you're already using. So with it being in the Carbon Black Cloud, it's alongside all of these other features that you have to identify risk, prevent, and detect and respond to attacks on your endpoints and workloads. And with that, it delivers three key benefits. So you're reducing your attack surface by building out your capabilities around identifying risk and hardening endpoints. You're increasing visibility into the current state of your endpoints and what vulnerabilities are present in your environment. And you're simplifying operations by streamlining that prioritization process and providing that enhanced security context that really makes the case for a certain vulnerability to be patched or monitored or remediated otherwise. So now I will hand it over to Dale to walk us through what this looks like in your console.
Okay, thanks very much, Shanley. And we did see some results come back from the poll, and it's pretty interesting. Apparently, we have some members, some participants here who maybe haven't implemented this or don't really understand the benefit that they can gain from it. One of the things that Shanley mentioned is the fact that you can use this to prioritize your workloads. And if you think about how security teams and the vSphere admin teams typically work, like Shanley said, there's usually some monthly list that gets propagated. We can dramatically shorten that entire communications path by presenting the data that I'm going to show you in just a minute to not only the security team in the Carbon Black console, but also to the vSphere admin team through the Carbon Black workload appliance that can be implemented in your environment. Okay, go ahead. I just wanted to make, go to the next slide, please. I just wanted to make mention of the fact that all of this data that we're going to talk about, particularly in the area of vulnerabilities, of which VMs are vulnerable, which vulnerabilities exist on which VMs, is, like I said, not only available in the Carbon Black Cloud console, but also in the vCenter of a Carbon Black Cloud workload integrated vCenter. All right, so the first thing that you're going to see is you're going to have endpoints or VMs, and you can see that in the top we have VMs. Let me just see if I can annotate. Doesn't look like it. Okay, yes, I can. So all right, so we have VMs and we have endpoints, and each of them are going to turn up some number of vulnerabilities. And you can see in this particular case, we're looking at critical vulnerabilities. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. So when we look at these vulnerabilities, not only do we show criticals, and we'll show this to you in just a minute, and you can see we can break these out by endpoints or by VMs. And obviously VMs are the virtual machines that have been reported into Carbon Black Cloud via the mechanisms that we recognize the VM, all right? In other words, they're not standalone endpoints. Okay, go to the next slide. And you can see, I mentioned that not only do we categorize these as critical, but we also categorize them as important, moderate, and low. And in this particular case, we're looking at endpoints, we're looking at critical vulnerabilities, and you can see that we have 21 endpoints that are affected by some 38 critical vulnerabilities. Okay, go to the next slide. When we start to drill down, what we're going to find is when we get to this detailed view is there's going to be a link to the vulnerability database where you can go and look at that CVE, and there's also going to be a vendor KB if there's one that's available. So in this particular case, we look at this Windows 10 Pro VM that we're working with here. We can remediate this particular CVE however we go about doing that. And then once we have remediated that, we can click on that Reassess Now link, and we will go back and reevaluate as to whether this particular endpoint is still vulnerable or still has this particular vulnerability. The nice part about that is if I am part of that vSphere admin team and I'm working on VMs, as I begin to correct those vulnerabilities or remediate them, the information security team will see that information be reflected in the Carbon Black console. So the vSphere admin team is essentially remediating vulnerabilities according to some list that the enterprise has come up with, or some particular criteria. Maybe they remediate criticals, immediate, importance get pushed to maybe a weekly or a monthly maintenance window. Moderates get pushed out maybe to like a quarterly. You get the idea, right? There could be some criteria. The vSphere admin team is free to work and remediate those vulnerabilities, and that's going to automatically be reflected in the Carbon Black Cloud console. So, all right, go to the next slide. And now we're going to look at it by vulnerabilities. We have selected all, and we can see all of the vulnerabilities. And we can also, if you look over on the right-hand side, we can see the number of assets, or the number of devices that have that particular vulnerability associated with them. In our particular case, there's only 2. And you can also see the Kenna risk score, and I'm not going to go into that. That's obviously why Jerry's here. But you can see that the Kenna risk score is a critical, or a 10. That's actually the highest score for a Kenna risk score that we have in our implementation of the Kenna risk score. And you can also see the KB that addresses that particular vulnerability. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. Like I said, there are some pop-up cards. You see the vulnerabilities one that we were just looking at in your upper left hand. And you can also see the risk assessment down below here. Notice if we look underneath the risk details, right by that little Kenna Security symbol, we can see that the Kenna risk score is 10. We can also see that it's easily exploitable, malware exploitable, and it has an active internet breach. So I'm not going to go in detail into the Kenna score, but we show that for each of the vulnerabilities that we record as part of what we're doing with vulnerability management. All right, go to the next slide. So we can get a count, we can reassess, and I've mentioned the Kenna risk number a couple of times. I gave you a little tease into some of the things that Kenna's looking at, but just know that we update from Kenna. We do pulls from those guys every 8 hours, and then we update those risk scores daily in the Carbon Black Cloud. Go to the next slide. So I'll wrap up and I'll pass it over to Jerry. But one of the things I want to mention about Kenna risk scores is we feel that this is a definite differentiator for our offering. By understanding what the Kenna risk score is made up of, which Jerry's going to take you through, you can very easily see how organizations could set up a priority, an operational priority list to deal with the vulnerabilities that really needed to be dealt with. And thank you guys for your time. And Jerry, go ahead.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Shanley. My name is Jerry Gamblin. I'm the Director of Security Research here at Kenna. If we'll go to the next slide, we'll dive right into the content, and hopefully I can get you guys to understand why the Kenna risk score is different than the CVSS score. CVSS is a static score. It's scored through a formula, and once that formula is scored, it stays that score for the rest of the life of there. I track this every month, and in 2021, the average CVSS risk score is 7.05. So if you've set up a policy or procedure in your organization that says that you're going to patch everything 7 and above, you've already backed yourself into a corner by saying that you're going to now patch half of all the CVEs that come out, no matter what they do. It's super easy to get a high CVE score, CVSS score. So we see that more and more, and just some modeling that we do over time makes it look like that score is going to continue to rise with the CVSS 3 scoring through the next 3 or 4 years, up to an average of around 8. The Kenna score is dynamic, and it's built on data science. We have a bunch of different data models that we bring in, vulnerability intelligence, but mostly it's, hey, what's the risk of this being exploited in your environment, and do you need to fix it? A couple of slides back, they showed a CV, a Kenna risk score of 10. The interesting thing about that is over the 10 years that we've been scoring CVEs, there are only 280 CVEs that score 10 out of 10. So while it's always neat to show those, we've only had 10 CVEs that scored a perfect 10 this year. And we've only seen about 5 or 6 of those widely deployed in organizations. So one of the things that Kenna does is really help reduce the amount of on fire work that you have to do today. Can we go to the next slide, please? And this kind of shows that breakdown a little bit more, right? You can see how it breaks down by CVSS2. The scanner score, some people have started to use that, and they're still weighted high. And then the Kenna risk score, and you can see that we don't rate very many CVEs that high. It's because we want to change the way that we message to our customers, and our customers, internal customers and organizations, message to their leadership and their boards. It's not that everything is a high. It's when we tell you something's important, we want you to believe it's important and go and fix it today. We never tell you just because something's rated a 60 or a 40 in Kenna that it's not important to patch. We just say, hey, if we're going to tell you something's rated in the top, 30% of all vulnerabilities, it's something that you need to go and fix today. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we do this by bringing in a bunch of telemetry from a bunch of different sources. We have probably one of the widest threat intelligence sources for CVEs and exploit intelligence. But we use this data a little bit different. We are not always looking for the cutting edge, right? We had an example of this to kind of get into a little background was the iOS bug from this week, right? That was a state actor. It was pointed at one person. It's hard to detect. While we want everyone to go patch their iPhone so that they can't be hacked by that, we were at the same time really talking to our people about patching the Microsoft Office vulnerability that came out this same week that affected MS-HTML, because we know the install base for that is over 80% of all the clients that we see. So in our rankings, the one that got all the press, the iOS phone hack, actually ranked and scored lower than the MS-HTML bug, Microsoft Office bug, that got very little press. But in a day-to-day environment, that's what organizations and companies need to be working on. And that's kind of the data that we plop out of here and pull out of these big data sources that most organizations tend to overlook because they want to make sure that they're patching everything that they see on the front page of the Wall Street Journal every morning. Can we have the next slide, please? This is just a breakdown of how we score. I've talked about this in some prior slides, but we score 0 to 10 in a simplified risk scoring engine for Carbon Black. In the Kenna platform, it's 0 to 100, but it's the same feature set. But just to know that it's not evenly distributed at all. Over 80% of all CVEs in our data set in that lower third from 30 back, and very few, I think I'll have to pull the numbers and I could do that for anybody who wants them, but very few, less than 5% set between 6 and 10. So if you start looking at the engine that way, understand that if we tell you that something's a 6, it's in the top 5% of all vulnerabilities that we know about. It's not in the middle. So that's where our distribution is a little bit different on our scoring chart than most people are used to seeing. Next slide, please.
Awesome. Yeah. So some resources that are available to everybody. So there is a white paper out there, Understanding the Kenna Risk Score, that really dives deep into what Jerry was just talking about, so that you can really understand how this risk score is getting come up with, what it means. And it's also a great resource to share with your leadership if you want to try to convince them about why this is a really great approach to your vulnerability management program. We have a data sheet out there for vulnerability management, and we also have VMworld coming up, and Jerry will be at our Meet the Experts session, so you guys can join that and hear a little bit more about our partnership with Kenna. So we do value your feedback, and we'd love to know what future topics you'd like to hear about. So we will be taking questions in just a minute, but if you wanted to drop any feedback you have about this session or on the other topics that you'd like to hear about from the Carbon Black or VMware Security team, then please let us know. And then we will get into questions. Let's see. Oh, yep, and we have another poll pop up too as well. So I do have a question for Jerry. One of the unique characteristics of the Kenna score is that they are dynamic and they change over time. Can you explain a little bit more about how Kenna develops the dynamic nature of these scores and how often they change and all of that?
Yeah, for sure. That's a good question, and I should have got into it a little bit earlier. But what we do is we take those data sources. We have about 40 data sources that push us data every hour about CVEs, and this is from either IPS sensors that are deployed on most networks, etc. And that data gets pushed into there and say, oh, we've seen some attack attempts on this, or we've seen successful exploitations. We do a little bit of what we call chatter watching. So we watch, dark web, Twitter, GitHub for POCs, and we bring all that data in, and then we will raise and lower the score based on that. One of our reports, P2P Volume 4, I think, talks about the lag between when a CVE is announced and already has its CVSS score and when a public exploit is released. And sometimes that lag is between 15 and 45 days that it takes a bad actor to take a patch that doesn't have a publicly available exploit, reverse engineer it, and then start using that to attack people. So we can raise the score when we start to see that action. And on the other hand, on the downside too, just because something rates 100 today, after you get to about 99, 100, even 95% patch rate, attackers start moving away from that. So our scores will start to go down over time. So something that was super important to patch in 2018 is going to have a much lower score than it is today if attackers have moved away from using it in their attacks.
Awesome, thank you. And we did get another question here. I think this can be addressed by Jerry or Dale. In using the feature, we've seen a few false positives. How can the accuracy of the results be improved, or what's like our single source of truth is the National Vulnerability Database. So we do rely on that for the latest information, but
so
yeah, Jerry, go ahead.
I think that question is a little bit more in depth. I think that Jason asked it. We link to all the known vulnerabilities that are being exploited. So if we say that an exploit exists, we've either got that through a 0-day provider, or we have linked to the code. I am not sure exactly if VMware exposes that information in the UI, but we do provide that information. If we say that there's a known exploit, we provide the signature for that. So if you're not seeing that, can you please work with the VMware Carbon Black team on there and raise those issues up? My team is responsible for that data, and if you're seeing seeing that, we would love to be able to figure out why and to help with that.
Awesome, thank you. All right. This is another, which you kind of touched on this. Is it possible for the Kenna score to decrease, and what would cause a decrease in the score?
Yep. Yeah, decreases is possible, and we do bleed the score down over time, especially when we see a lack of attacks and a lack of usage by bad actors. As you'll see, the Exchange vulnerabilities from earlier this year are rated 10 out of 10, 100, and we're seeing a ton of activity. If you come back in 6 to 12 months, those will slide down. They'll never slide down to 0 or to a range where we tell you that they're not important, but they'll bleed off about 10 or 15% of their total score over a year.
Hey, Jerry, you and I have talked about this before, but could you just maybe walk us through what the Kenna score looked like as the whole print nightmare situation unfolded? Again, you and I have talked about this, so I think that's kind of interesting how rapidly the number changed.
Yeah, the print nightmare was actually a very interesting vulnerability earlier this summer, because it came out as one CVE, and we were tracking that CVE and had it on an upward trend. And then that next patch Tuesday, Microsoft switched that CVE to a brand new CVE, and it went from 30 to 100, our highest ranking, because we saw exploitations happening on that vulnerability right away, right out of the gate. So we were able to, as soon as we pulled that information in from the NVD, to get people patching on that right away and provide them with all the intelligence-backed information they need. Like, here's a workaround, here's the vulnerability. Actually, here's some POC code if your team is asking you, hey, can we see where this code is located?
Hannah, if I can, or Shanley, if I can just, someone posted in a Q&A about the Adobe issue with versioning, and I can tell you that that's actually being looked at by engineering right now. I know this because I'm following that particular bug, if you will, through engineering. So it is being looked at. We are aware of that issue. So I would just say stay tuned.
Awesome. And one other question that we got was for Carbon Black Cloud Workload, there is the integration with vCenter, which provides a direct path for remediation. What plans or integrations are available? I can kind of kick that off and Dale or Jerry, but yeah, so obviously for Carbon Black Cloud Workload, we do have that easy one-to-one remediation path through the vCenter appliance. On endpoints, it's platform products. We do have open APIs available, integrate into your existing workflows, and also our data forwarder, which can be used to integrate with Splunk or QRadar or your SIM or any. Talk about what integrations or remediation to see for the endpoint offering. Feel free to put that in the chat. We're obviously not, this product isn't complete, and so there will be roadmap and future. Okay, I think I cut out a little bit, but yeah, so basically we this product, and there will be other integrations and remediation paths in the future. But yeah, feel free to provide your feedback if you have any. We got another question. What source of truth is Carbon Black using for vulnerability inventory? We are using the National Vulnerability Database. That's where we collect the vulnerability inventory from. And yes, you will be able to access the recording and slides from this session. They'll be sent out as soon as we're finished here and posted somewhere. But awesome. Covered all of the questions. Let's see. Yeah. So there are some additional resources here. Like we said, you guys will get the slides after this, so everything here is linked and available to you. And be sure to register for VMworld coming up October 5th to 7th. It is all virtual again this year, but we have a lot of great content, and we hope everybody will be able to join us. So I think that wraps us up here. Thank you very much, everybody.